This week I'm back home in the Lake District after my week of windswept Cornish seascapes, and I had a fantastic time. I really enjoyed myself down in Cornwall, and I've come back to the lakes feeling like a new man with renewed energy. And so this week I think it's a great time to start my Hand of Man project. You may remember from my video a couple of weeks ago I talked about adding purpose to my photography by starting a project designed to show the impact that man has had on the Lake District landscape. And that's why this morning I've come to High Dam near Finsthwaite. High Dam is of course not a naturally occurring feature. It is a man-made reservoir that's been created by damming one of the becks that runs into Windermere. It is a beautifully still morning. It's very overcast and there's even patches of mist about. And these are my favourite conditions to shoot in, and I'm starting with a very simple composition of the island here at High Dam. And this is my favourite composition. Very simple, nothing flashy at all, just allowing the landscape to speak for itself. And when we talk about developing our own style, I think this is an area that I want to explore a lot more. Just creating very simple compositions that just allow the Lake District to speak for itself. As beautiful as this scene is, I'm not sure it really shows off the hand of man. This could be almost any lake anywhere in the world. There's nothing here to show that this is a reservoir. And so what I want to do now is to challenge myself to try and find a composition that includes a visual clue to let the viewer know that this is man-made. Probably the most obvious thing to try is a composition that uses the dam wall itself. Unfortunately, most of the interest is behind me and there's not an awful lot of room to work. And if we try and shoot at an angle, what happens is the dam acts as a leading line and it actually draws the attention out of the frame. One thing that I think makes a great photographic subject, although not every Yorkshireman agrees with me, are the cairns that mark the summits of the fells. This rather impressive looking structure is the summit cairn at the top of Hallin Fell. Now, despite my lack of fitness, I still managed to get up here from the church at Martindale in under 20 minutes. So it's not going to surprise you when I tell you that Hallin Fell is only 388 metres high. But I reckon there's at least another 3 metres of cairn. Now it's fairly overcast this morning, there isn't an awful lot of light about. We did have a bit of low cloud that blew in early, but that's all now gone. So let's call this a scouting mission and look at the composition that I had in mind. Now, Hallin Fell sits above Ullswater, so I want to include the lake in my composition. And it's also quite an imposing structure, so I want to try and make it as big in the frame as I possibly can. So the composition I've gone for is very, very simple. Nice and big cairn on the right hand side, and then Ullswater in the distance on the left hand side. Having said that, there is a bit of light on the hills in the distance, so we might get a little bit of light on the cairn itself. This might not be a scouting trip after all. I haven't got an awful lot of time this morning to hang around. I need to get home and get on with some work. But before I go, let's have a chat about the images that I took yesterday. Fortunately, I am much happier with the shot that includes the down wall. At the time I was concerned that it drew the eye out of the frame, but actually when I got it onto the computer I could see that when it gets to the wood it actually kicks back in again, and I think that that's quite effective. What it does is it draws the viewer's eye up the frame and then pushes it to the right where the interest is, essentially the trees that are reflecting on the surface of the reservoir. If you're looking for evidence of the hand of man here in the Lake District, you're not going to find an earlier example than Castlerigg Stone Circle, which is thought to be about 4,500 years old. Now, for a photographer who only thinks in fractions of a second, that is one very, very long exposure. Now, Castlerigg can be a difficult place to shoot, not for any compositional reasons. I subscribe to the stick it in the middle theory, but it can be difficult because of other people. So the last two times I've been here, I've had people camping in the middle of the stone circle and people just sitting there in the middle of the stone circle waiting for the sunrise. And as a photographer, you have to deal with that. We don't own the Lake District, so we have to work with what we've got. But this morning I do have a few other photographers here to keep me company. This is a lovely composition of the stone circle because behind it we've got the mountains of Low and High Rigg, and this is the first time I've been to Castlerigg since I bought my 16 to 35mm lens, and that means that I can get much closer to the stone circle than ever before, and that means that the stones in the very foreground are going to be much bigger in the composition than I've ever been able to get before. There is a little bit of rain in the air this morning, so it's a constant battle to keep water droplets off the front of my filters. But of course they do say that you get good pictures in bad weather, and I think I've got quite lucky this morning. Now, we've all got locations that are close to home, and Castlerigg is only 30 minutes away from where I live, and it's literally a 30-second walk from the car. And that's very handy today because I've got plenty of work that I need to be doing when I get back to the office. Right on cue, it has just started to rain much more heavily. The umbrella's up, so it's time for me to pack up my gear, get home, and get on with my day's work. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the beautiful Grasmere Lake. I've been here for about 2 hours now, and when I arrived it was very calm, and then we had some rain blow in, but now everything has settled down, and I have to say it is absolutely gorgeous here this morning. The hand of man that I'm here to shoot this morning is Allen Bank, the former home of the poet William Wordsworth, and conditions could not be better. It is perfectly still. We have some beautiful reflections. We've even got some gorgeous light coming through now, and to cap it all off, there's even some low-hanging cloud on the mountains. You don't get conditions like this every day, and normally I'm quite composed when I'm on location, but this morning I've been moving from one composition to the next pretty quickly. Now, I think I got the shot that I'm after. I'm pretty confident, but even now, after 13-14 years of shooting, I still get nervous about looking at the images on the computer when I've had conditions like this, in case I ballsed it up. This scene just seems to be getting better and better as the light levels rise. Yesterday I was out on a 1-to-1 and Nigel had some absolutely beautiful conditions. He had some amazing clouds, he had some fantastic light, and he even had some rainbows. And when I'm on 1-to-1s, I am totally focused on what the other photographer is doing. I do not shoot myself. And I was absolutely delighted for Nigel that he got some brilliant shots, but the photographer in me was a little disappointed that I didn't get anything in such wonderful conditions. But this morning has more than made up for it. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end. The wind's now picked up and we've lost the reflections. And I need to head on now because I'm heading up to Loughrig Fell to scout out a location for a one-to-one that I've got in a couple of weeks' time. If you're looking for a shot that shows the hand of man in the landscape, then you can do a lot worse than this bad boy. Here we've got not one, not two, but three elements all created by man. First we've got this barn here, then we've got this dry stone wall running in front, and then in the distance we've got Wetsleddle Reservoir. I'm very pleased to say that I was working all day Thursday, and so I've had to come out today, Saturday, to get my 5th shot of the week. And although we haven't necessarily got Saturday weather, it is at least dry, we also don't have an awful lot of light. The lack of light doesn't worry me too much this morning. What it does mean is that I can spend some time working on my composition. And I think I'm going to need to here because it's actually quite a complex scene. There are far more elements in this scene than I would normally include in one of my photographs. And so now I've got to work extra hard to make sure I get a pleasing composition where all the elements are reasonably well balanced. With this composition, it's not so much what I want to include that's causing problems, it's what I want to exclude. So the photograph is going to concentrate on the wall, particularly this sign that says footpath, the barn and the reservoir. There are a couple of other distracting elements that I'm trying to exclude from the frame. And there's also a couple of elements that I want to make sure that I don't cut off on the edge of the frame. So the distracting elements, there is a bit of a concrete path that runs across. I think there's a stream that runs over, so this is the top of the bridge, I guess, that runs over this little stream. That's not particularly attractive. And then there's also a fence, fairly new fence, that runs through the middle of the scene. So what I'm trying to do with the top of the bridge is to try and exclude it completely, and the fence, as much as possible, hide it behind the wall. Now if I get too low, I actually lose sight of the reservoir. So I need to be very careful with that. In order to get the right balance of elements in the frame, I may have to include part of the top of that concrete bridge. And I guess my only option really will be to try to clone it out in Photoshop. As with any composition, this one is going to be a little bit of a compromise. In order to get the key elements positioned as I would like them, I think I'm going to have to include a little bit too much empty space on the right hand side of the frame. It's not the end of the world because it does give a little bit of context as to exactly where we are. And really it's been a case of fine-tuning exactly where I want the camera, and a couple of feet either side have been making all the difference. I'm pretty pleased with the start that I've made to my Hand of Man project. I think I've got some pretty good images, particularly the compositions. Now I think there's still a lot to do matching the right lighting conditions to the scene, but that's something that I will work on in future. Now if you're interested in reading what I really think about my images, my own critique of my own images, then I'm going to start doing that on a weekly basis in my blog, and there'll be a link in the description below.